Good morning, everybody. I am doing a lecture for you on comparing and contrasting. And we have talked about how to compare and contrast arguments before, but today I wanted to get a little bit more specific, especially in reference to your Ehrenreich and Martinez essay. So I'm just going to kind of read/lecture to you a little bit about comparison and contrasting and the purpose of it. So comparison in writing discusses elements that are similar, obviously, while contrasting are the elements that are different. A comparison and contrast essay then discusses both together. So there are two main ways you can organize your thoughts in a comparison contrast essay. You can do it by the subjects themselves, discussing one subject and then the next subject. So for example, if you were to write a Martinez-Ehrenreich comparison contrast essay, you would talk about Martinez first and then Ehrenreich. The other way you can do it is by the comparison and contrast elements themselves. So looking at something in Martinez and something in Ehrenreich and talking about them at the same time, and then talking, excuse me, and then talking about individual parts of the essay. So those are the two ways you can organize a compare and contrast essay. Sometimes those essays can be difficult because it's hard to go back and forth between texts. It's hard to go back and forth between comparing and contrasting. Really, you have several layers of analysis that you'll be doing for that type of thing. So the key to a good compare-contrast essay is choosing two elements that would go well for that purpose. So I'm choosing for you the Ehrenreich and Martinez, but let's say in English 201, you have to do a compare-contrast essay. You would want to choose two things that have legitimate things in common, and you would also want to talk about things that they don't have in common. A lot of times when you think on the surface, essays have things in common. When you uncover some of the layers, the way that those things are talked about might be different. So you could talk about how two essays have the same topic. That's a compare, but they talk about them differently. That's a contrast, okay? Or maybe two essays have hyperbole, but the way they use the hyperbole is different. So that's where you uncover the layers of your sources. So one purpose of compare and contrast is drawing distinctions among categories and helping your reader understand what those distinctions are. So for us, when we are looking at writing, we're mostly analyzing. So we're looking at the distinctions between the structures of arguments of those particular authors and their arguments. Okay. So for a thesis statement, how do you make an argument about comparing and contrasting? Well, you want to isolate something specific and talk about both. For example, organic vegetables may cost more than those that are conventionally grown, but when put to the test, they are definitely worth the extra money. Here, the thesis sets up two subjects to be compared and contrasted, organic versus conventional vegetables you buy in a store. And it makes a claim about the results that might prove useful to a reader. So that is an essay comparing, contrasting the use of organic vegetables versus grocery vegetables. And the claim is that it's worth the extra money. So then that essay would have to specifically talk about why it's worth the money, and it would also have to address opposition. Okay. All right. So two writing process things I wanted to go over for compare and contrast. T-chart is definitely going to come in handy. Venn diagram. Do you remember what those two tools are? T-chart is just like that. You put one subject here, the other subject here, and you can go point by point. And then you guys know Venn diagram. That's a terrible drawing. but one subject goes here, one subject goes here, and what is similar goes in the middle. Now, Venn diagrams, I don't really like drawing them because I write too big, so I use templates on the computer if I'm going to use those. And this would be this is what you were supposed to take notes on for your charts for both Martinez and Ehrenreich. You were supposed to identify the issues in their essays, the stakes, the need for change, how they use personal testimony, and the effectiveness. So this should all be a review for you, and you should have these charts in your notes already. Okay? Now, how do we bring them together? So you took notes on these separately for the essays. How do we bring them together and put them in academic conversation? Well, I did like a thought process flow chart here for you. You don't have to take notes like this. You can easily put this information in something more accessible like these. I just put it like this to show you kind of the flow of narrowing down my ideas. Okay. So I have, let's see if I can hold this good here with no glare. For the Martinez essay, under issues in my chart, I talked about history versus honesty. So that's one of the issues in the essay, right? Like we look at history as factual, but really origins of history are often mythologized by the winners. Okay. And that's what Martinez is talking about, how one particular narrative dominates American history, and that's those of winners, which are typically white, which are typically male. So, all right. So I identified that history versus honesty is an issue. Then to put some course vocabulary on top of that, I thought about binaries of thought. Okay. So historical facts versus historical myth, or historical perspectives, one perspective versus another perspective, or one perspective versus the lack of other perspectives, right? Like we don't just want two perspectives on history. In order to be informed, we should look at many perspectives. And then the key to, collegiate level thinking would be, what's the purpose of putting these two ideas in opposition to one another? And that's what you can analyze, right? What do you think the purpose of historical fact versus historical myth is for this particular essay? Think about that for a minute. I think it's for all of us to reflect on our learning, like in the discussion board that you already did, and think about, what were we taught? Who taught us this? Why was it chosen to be taught? Is it mandated by the state? Is it mandated by the federal government? Why? You always want to question, why am I being told a particular thing is a fact? Okay. So even though we might have winners of wars, right? Or we might have statistics of how many people died during a certain time. The perspective on those statistics, or the perspective on who won or who lost, is very important to realize, right? And I've given you the example before of like Christopher Columbus or Harvey Weinstein. All right, so to connect, to compare and contrast, you have this from your chart. And then for Ehrenreich, how does this thought process, how does the Martinez thought process reflect in the Ehrenreich essay? So how do we bring these two pieces together into conversation? Okay, so the Ehrenreich essay has a similar issue, historical fact versus historical myth, but it's presented completely differently. She talks a lot about how she doesn't really have cultural mythologized history herself. She's more into thinking about the facts of her family values. Okay. And then what I would end up with if I'm writing an essay, this would prompt me to do a thesis. How do Martinez's and Ehrenreich's binaries of thoughts interact, and how are they different? So there's obviously a lot of differences between the essays in general. All you need to do is like filter them into using some of that course vocabulary. Okay. Now for today's assignment, you can download the outline of this lecture and what you're supposed to do for Tuesday's class, April 7th, in the course materials folder in the document titled 4749 classes. And if you download that, it's going to tell you the details of your writing response assignment that you're going to do today. And the writing response is going to be submitted in the paper assignments folder on Blackboard. And all of that will be detailed in the document and course materials. If you have any questions about that assignment, please feel free to email me, text me, call me. I've had some really productive conversations with some of you so far. This week's, as far as like looking ahead, planning ahead, you need to go back and do the discussion boards from the past 2 weeks if you have not done them. You need to do the writing response for Tuesday, April 7th class. And then you will have 2 discussion boards on Thursday to complete, because we are doing 2 discussion boards every week. The writing response that you're going to do based off of today's lecture and your work with Martinez and Ehrenreich will count as a paper grade. So do your best on that. That is not going to be a discussion board. It's going to be an assignment, like I said. So you'll be typing up a Word document for that one. And I think I've given you plenty of foundational things to think about for Martinez and Ehrenreich. But if not, and you have more questions or you want to talk about the essays, just please reach out to me and let me know. Enjoy the sun today.